ain't no wannabes here. With some not so nice advice for your writing career. To be clear, no punches will be pulled, but the punch may be spiked. How they like before they get on the mic. To my left we got the mighty Mer Lafferty. And if I piss her off, believe me, she'll come after me. And her co-host, Matt Evan Wallace, on the right. Yes, she may be half as hype as she can take him in a fight. So settle in, folks, buckle in and boot up. Time to meddle in a way to make your writer shut up. It's hard work, but the perk is that it's fun and exciting. Facebook will still be there when you're done writing. Ditch Diggers! Ditch Diggers!
Coming to you live from Morgan Freeman's Bear Sanctuary, it is the Ditch Diggers with Mer Lafferty, Matt Wallace, and guest host Tobias Buckell. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Sure. I've been excited to have Toby on ever since January, and since it's now April, it's been a long time for excitement. But Toby and I...
We admire your sustain. Right?
Yeah. Toby and I sat down just to hang out for a bit, and the conversation just turned to an unexpectedly mind-blowing, for me anyway, topic. And after, Toby talked to me for an hour, I said, can you just reproduce exactly what you just said, only for Ditch Diggers when we record? And he was kind enough to say yes. So thank you for being on the show, Toby.
Again, thanks for having me, and I'll do my best to reproduce what I was talking about.
That mind-blowing effect that you laid down on Mer?
Yeah, this is like, she's not overselling it or anything.
I'm not. I'm totally not.
She hasn't set you up for failure at all.
Not at all.
There's nowhere to go but down from here.
Fine. Toby and I had an interesting conversation that I thought if we had a hole in the schedule and we could fit him in, maybe it would entertain like 5 people if we brought him on. How's that?
That's what I'm talking about.
All right.
You're understanding. Okay, I actually didn't get that until the end there. I'd forgotten what we just said 30 seconds before. So I was like, wait, you're flip-flopping on us, Murray. No, that's perfect. Let's go with that. And then if we get 6 people, it's a win.
That's right.
That's the metaphor for your writing career right there. Like, you aim for 5 people, and if you get 6, it's a win.
That's my aiming for any public appearance.
No, that actually is. Sadly,
yeah.
that is a good metric, literally. Most of the time.
Anyway, so we'll start with that, and essentially Toby was telling me about channeling your inner asshole, and this is something that I have a big problem with, which is why, sorry to oversell it, it was so mind-blowing to me, because Toby just laid it out in a very relatable way to a wimp like me.
I'm already intrigued. I want to hear more about channeling your inner asshole.
So what can you tell us about that and how you've used it in your career?
It sounds so much more negative than just your inner asshole. But I think we were talking initially about the power of no.
Yes.
Right, if I recall correctly. And forgive me because I just have the world's most horrible memory.
No, that was right.
We were talking about the power of no. And one of the things I was talking about was negotiation, in decisions about choices to make in your artistic career, and whether or not to accept a project or whether or not a project is giving you the terms that you need. There's always a place that you can come from of just being able to say no. And I think that so many artists are unwilling to say no or to walk away, and they don't realize that the power that they have to walk away in terms of what that gives you. Of course, the thing that scares people about walking away is that you can get a negative result, which is that the deal falls through. But if you are able to come to a project with a clear sense of what you need to get out of it and where your boundaries are, and make a peace with the idea that you will walk away if you don't get certain things met, I think you can live with yourself a lot better and be a more effective negotiator because you understand what your boundaries are. So you kind of have to access, like I was saying, that inner asshole who understands exactly what it is you want. And you have to access that inner asshole who is willing to say no and willing to accept the consequences of a no. Saying no when you really don't mean it is kind of something that will cause you to fold and make you be really bitter about a negotiation that goes south, right? The last thing you want to do is be someone who says, I can't accept this thing here. And then someone says, well, okay, we can't go through with this deal. And then you walk away from that thinking like, oh man, but I really wanted the deal. So you do have to kind of be really honest with yourself about what it is you want. But the power of no is that, like, I think a lot of us forget that in every single conversation we have about our art and our projects and the teams that we're assembling for our projects is that we always have the option to say no and shut everything down and walk away if we're like deeply unhappy about how things are going, and I meet way too many tentative artists. And so one of the things I just constantly try to encourage people is to realize that you can say no and walk away from a deal. And I meet lots of people who say like, oh, well, we're being asked for this, this, and this, and this in terms of a potential deal, or I don't want to give up control of this. And yeah, you can meet those artists who are total prima donnas who are so focused on control that they're in the wrong, they're focused on all the wrong things. But I also meet so many tentative artists that I spend a lot of time trying to say like, you can say no to, for example, I meet a lot of writers who really hate doing publicity things, and in
Right.
this day and age, it's really important to get out there and do publicity. Yes, absolutely. But if you are reduced to panic attacks and you're having to take medication and you're miserable and you're not getting any writing done and it's negatively impacting your career, it's okay to say no to most publicity things. You can still build a career around just writing a book and putting it out. It's hard. It's not optimal. But if that's all you want to do, like to your dying breath, then you have to begin to sort of construct a life around that and figuring out what your hard boundaries are and just saying no. And many people are surprised that like when they say no, they often will get a result that works for them, and just kind of like quietly hoping that something will resolve in your favor. It usually doesn't work that way. And so it's, none of us are getting paid like mad money to do this. So if there's aspects of art and creativity that are making you miserable, it's like, just say no, unless they're throwing insane amounts of money at you that you're kind of like, well, I can say yes for that kind of money.
Right, absolutely. No, and I think the operative word in there, that's all brilliant. I agree with every single word you just said, Toby, is the operative word there is control. I think being a freelance writer is feeling like you have no control over anything most of the time. And I think that's where most writers approach it from, sadly. But that is, past everything else, you absolutely do have that control over the situation. You can say no and walk away. So if you're feeling that way, if you're feeling like you have no control over anything, absolutely remember the power of no is the ultimate control, and you have that. I think that's really important and empowering, and something that most freelance writers, people aspiring to be, just don't start out with. It's not a tool that most of us have.
Yeah.
And it's a very powerful negotiating tool, because sometimes you say no and everything shuts down, and 6 weeks later people come back and they're like, okay, so you seem to have meant it. Let's start talking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's kind of like buying a car. You have to be ready to do the walkout at any moment. I'll walk right out of here, and you got to be.
You have to mean it.
You have to mean it. No, I like what you said about it, because you can bluff them, but you can't bluff yourself, and that's
Right.
You're kind of talking about that, as if you're bullshitting and then it doesn't work, you're just going to feeling like crap about yourself and like, well, that didn't work, I'm never going to say no again because that went disaster. You have to mean it. You absolutely have to be prepared for the consequences of it. Yeah.
And I have problems asserting myself a lot, which is why I grabbed onto this whole The Power of No is a much smoother title for this than Channeling Your Inner Asshole. Except that's what I took away from it, because that's what I remember as that's what I have to do. I have to search for this hard part inside of me and say, this person is the thing that will stand up for myself and say no when I need to. But I know this is starting to sound vague, Toby, but
Sure.
How do you find those boundaries that you are okay with? I know I know everyone's going to be different, but how do you begin to search for that?
Well, I mean, when I'm negotiating with a project, I'm always looking at, and I'm not perfect at this either, by the way. I mean, there's what we aspire to, and then there's operational actuality. So, there's some aspects of my life where it's really hard for me to sort of come out with the hard no, and things that are in limbo sometimes that are hard to negotiate through. But for the most part, I find it like in places like, for example, one of the places I found where to say no was when I first started out in this business. I went to a lot of conventions, science fiction conventions, to reach fans, and because there's a really strong culture in amongst newer writers in our field of people who are like going to lots and lots of conventions, and I thought I had to try and keep up with that and reach readers and be part of this kind of almost scene. I don't know. Part of it just came from fear of missing out.
Yeah,
right.
All these people going, and even though it's not, because like a couple hundred writers, there are always going to be 10 to 20 of them at a convention on any given weekend. And so you just constantly see that on your social media feed and you think, oh my gosh, I should be out there more. Even if it's just, they're all, staggered. It's a false thing that you see, but you still seeps in. And a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I need to go to every single convention I go to. And that costs money. And in the very beginning of my career, I spent a lot of money trying to go to a lot of conventions to reach out and reach readers. And when my financial situation changed in 2009, after some medical difficulties and having the debt from that, one of the things that I immediately kind of sat down on a list was like, I can't afford to pay massive amounts of money traveling around to all these different places to try and build readership that way. And I'm not really sure what how beneficial that is. And so my new thing was just, I will not travel unless someone's covering my travel or I'm getting a speaker's fee, which seemed at the time incredibly arrogant to write down and say, like, this is my hard boundary. I felt like a complete tool saying that because it felt like, oh my gosh, well, I'm just this guy who's published like one novel. I'm not a giant in the field, but I will not travel unless someone's paying me. That just seems like such a self-involved thing to say. But I wrote it down and I said, this is my hard boundary. My family needs protected. I can't spend this money on travel to conventions when I need to take care of, these baby twins that I have now that I'm responsible for, and this like amount of medical debt that I need to pay off. I need to focus on me. And this is just one of the self-defense boundaries I put up. I can't travel unless it's covered. It can't cost my family anything. So I set up these walls. And the very first time, someone approached me and said, we'd like you to come do XYZ event. I said, alas, it sounds like an amazing event, but I can't do it because I no longer travel on my own nickel. And it was really tough because they're like, well, we can't pay, we're just a smaller convention. We can't pay for you to travel here. And I was like, I completely understand. I'm really sorry. So I felt kind of like a tool, but I was firm. I said no. And then things kind of moved on. And I thought, no one's ever going to invite me to come do anything ever again. And I just made peace with that. I was like, no one's going to pay for me to go anywhere. This will never work. I'll never meet my readers again. But it's all okay because I'll be financially solvent and I get to keep writing. So I just kind of focused on that. But after a while, people started to say oh, okay, well, we will have you as a guest, or other places would say oh yeah, we do have a speaker's fee budget, or things like that. And over time, a lot of my travel has now become paid travel, and I don't pay for my own travel. And so that's this thing where I just had to set up this no field to kind of filter out the pressure of wanting to go on my own nickel. So now I go places occasionally on airline miles or, regular vacations, which I never did before, but it just came out.
So this is a good segue, Toby. What are you doing this summer? Or did we lose him? Did I lose everybody? Am I the lost one? I can't hear anybody.
came out here for originally. There she is.
Sorry. This is why I am now. I feel like the most hated person in Overwatch because I keep dropping and leaving people on their own to die.
Yeah, that is terrible of you.
Yeah, I know. I know. It's terrible.
What did you like? When did you cut out? When did the recording cut out? Toby did a whole thing there, and it was really good.
Yeah, I know. Toby was talking about how he now goes on airline miles and when other people pay, and I was about to segue. Yeah, I got most of it. Yeah. I was about, well, then I assume. Good. But I was about to segue into what you're doing this summer.
Okay.
Because you've got NASFIC, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you want to like do the segue?
Oh, let's make it smooth and stuff.
All right, make it smooth.
I'll try. So speaking of having people pay your way, you're guest of honor this summer at a pretty big convention, right?
Yeah, holy crap. I mean, guest of honor at NASFIC, which is just sort of almost like being guest of honor at Worldcon. I mean, it's just one step away from that. It's down in Puerto Rico this year. And that's such a huge honor, and something that I thought was completely off the table when I sort of made that hard boundary of I'm not going to pay to travel anywhere, So I'm incredibly lucky that they think I'm worth being a guest of honor and that's a draw. So wow.
No, man, congratulations. Yeah, that is amazing.
Blows my mind, right? So I just and so the idea of being unable to say no came out of this fear of thinking that, I'd never be able to have access to things like that if I said no. And the truth was, I said no and I kept my head down and I worked really hard. And those opportunities eventually became available for me because it wasn't a case of things going away if I said no. It's just a case of me saying well, I'm going to lose some things because I can't afford to travel to them now that I have a family and things, have changed. But also I find travel exhausting and all that good stuff.
Well, so absolutely.
Yeah. It's here are my walls. Anything that's outside of them, I just can't do. I'll be really polite about it, but I'm very much this isn't something I can do, with the exception of a local con once a year that I go to.
Yeah, if you can drive to it, that's kind of a rule I set this year. I decided I wasn't going to fly anywhere on my own dime, but I would do local stuff. Sure. If I could drive to it, then I would do it. And I really didn't think that would amount to much. And then I'm doing LA Times Book Fest this weekend. I'm doing StokerCon next weekend. I ended up doing a bunch more signings because I was focusing on local things. It opened, rather than being a detriment, that kind of mentality. I would argue it opened things up for you even more. It's I
think of it like pruning.
Yeah.
It's kind of I want to build this. I want more of this and less of this. Right. And so you kind of just prune those branches that are these things will cost you. Well, snip, and yes, immediately after you do the pruning, the tree looks really threadbare, to mix my metaphors horribly. But after time, that other 4-pay stuff then kind of, gets bushier and you kind of oh, great, look, the 4-pay tree looks wonderful over here.
Yeah. No, I think of it it's the same way as setting your pay rate, for your freelancing. You set a rate for yourself and you decide this is what I charge and I'm not going to take any less than this. You find that suddenly people will rise to that pay rate because you demand it, and it's the same with travel. If you decide I'm only going to go to cons that pay my way, I think that generates kind of also a perception of you that, well, Tobias Buckell, if we want him, we got to pay for him. So, but you become somebody that they're willing to pay for. I think one thing feeds the other, personally.
I hope so. I mean, I try to give value for
well, no, obviously, no. I'm not saying it's not hype. I'm not calling you hype. I'm just saying, but but I really think that's just, to me, because you talk about your emotional state of, feeling arrogant or feeling well, I'm not worth people paying me. I really think everybody, just from a professional standpoint, should be viewing conventions and things that way. I mean, in an ideal world, I think every professional attending a professional convention should be getting compensation for it. Now, it does not work that way at all most of the time, but I think a large part of that is because we accept that that's the way it is. But to me, I don't find that arrogant at all. You're always giving value when you go to a convention as a guest, and I think every professional should be in compensation for that. So I don't find it arrogant at all, and I think having that mentality creates more professional opportunities for you. So I totally agree with that.
And I understand that conventions are like these volunteer things. Everyone's there to volunteer, and lots of people who are showing up are volunteering their time. I just am at a point in my life where I don't have room to volunteer. It's like I spend so much time writing that, to make my living wage, that like I don't have a lot of spare time. So it's like I just view that as just so much, lost time if I go and I spend 3, 4, 5 days, for free traveling and getting somewhere and hanging out there and then coming back. So
absolutely, but you have a family, you got people waiting for you. It's a necessity, if anything.
Toby, I want to talk a little bit about we touched on the whole freelance rate and standing on that. You and I also discussed how you're edging up your rate for I believe it was speaking and appearances, but it can pretty much be broadened to anything you get paid for. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you remember us talking about that?
Yeah, there's an interesting book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, Voss. He's a former FBI negotiator. The tagline to the book is "Negotiating as if your life depended on it."
Yeah.
Nice. Which is a really interesting book, and one of the strategies from it was pretty fascinating, which has been really interesting for my speaking rate. And what that strategy was actually, I have this book to thank and Ramez Nam to thank, because he relayed the strategy in it to me via an article when I was talking to him. Because the most common rate you get asked as a writer, the most common question you get asked as a writer when someone's approaching you about speaking is, "What's your speaking fee?" Which to me is this remarkably nebulous, impossible to answer question. Because it's like, the first thing I feel is like, well, I don't know, how much does your organization make? Is kind of my impulse. Like, are we talking about a small local library, a volunteer organization, or are you just a Fortune 500 company? Because it completely changes the discussion. So one of the strategies in there is to respond to an honest request for your speaking rates with not so much an actual fee, because there have been many times where I've given a set fee and found out that I've gone to speak to an arm of a Fortune 500 company about creativity, for example, where it's like you cite them a rate of, hey, I'll talk to you for a day for $1,000. And it turns out that they have like a $20,000 budget for.
Right. Then you just feel like an asshole, right?
You just feel dumb, and that's happened to me before. So what I started doing was and it's so hard to tell how much money people have for events like these, because sometimes you talk to a small college and they have like this really healthy budget for a speaker to come in, and sometimes you talk to someone and they just have nothing, So if it's a thing you really want to do, you kind of go with this response that's like, hey, I'm really excited. I'd really love to do this. You've got to pay my travel expenses to get there. But as for the actual, honorarium, here's the cap. Here's as much as I've ever been paid for doing that, is kind of the idea. You sort of cite the high end and you say, like, I'm really looking forward to seeing how much you can match.
Right. Yeah.
And
somewhere to go. That's why you start.
Yeah, high. Exactly. Yeah, so they can come in low if they want, but then they're going to be aware that this is what they're competing with. So I cite them different things I've done and how much I've been paid, and then they can kind of compare themselves to that standard. And he has some great examples in the book of how to use that strategy. And I've actually found I sort of got a lot of extra money out of just kind of tweaking the language in my responses by just sort of talking about how much I've been paid at the top for different projects. And I found that remarkably effective, because it's an honest conversation. I'm not saying like, oh, I'm demanding this much, like just because someone paid me $5,000 for a speaking event, I'm not, going to say like, from now on, I want $5,000. But what it did was it changed my top, right? So, whereas before it had been like, $2,000 is my top, for an event, it was like the first time I got paid the larger amount, I could then turn around and say to the next person, oh, I've been paid as much as this much. So then from then on, they kind of understand that, that's kind of the range that you've been able to work in. So that was kind of eye-opening for me, because I always really struggled with the idea of how to respond to that. And for a long time, I just had, just $500 was my standard fee for a long time.
Yeah, no, I think we can all agree one of the top 3 things that terrify writers are asking for money. I think that would definitely make the list. But if you don't ask, very few people are ever going to offer. That's just the reality of it. Or they're going to offer you $500 where you could be making.
Or they'll offer you your $500. Exactly.
Yeah. And
the other thing I did for a while was I would always say like, well, I trust you to give me a fair offer.
Nice.
I actually lost 3 gigs that way. Like they were just like, well, if you can't name a price, we're out.
Right.
And I was just like, crap, I'm trying to be honest here. Like, let's start negotiating. But that was a bad way of doing it, I guess. So
well, that's the thing. There are ways to be honest. There are multiple ways to be honest, and you have to pick one that isn't. I think indecisive is one of the worst ways you can go. Yeah. You have to or seeming indecisive. Even if you're trying to be forthright, you just come across as someone who they can't talk to. So no, that's fantastic, and I'll be sure that we have a link to that book in the show notes as well, because I'm going to be getting that. It sounds good.
Yeah, definitely. And this is just for any newer listeners, or newer writer listeners. This is something to use when you've already been doing it. I mean, yes, you can lie and say when you've never spoken before that you got X amount of money, but that's not something you want to be caught doing. So this is for people who've already been speaking and want to increase their fees. But it's a negotiation thing.
Grounded in truth for me, because I just, as an individual, I never want to have to be caught out in a lie. Mm-hmm. So it's not like I have a strong honor code or anything. It's just sort of like, for me, I think like when I'm engaged in this negotiation process, I give them the venue, so that if they feel really strongly about, I don't think he got paid that much for this gig, like I give them the name of the venue. I'm like, this venue paid this much for me to come in and do this exact same kind of thing. They're able to actually, if they really feel strongly, they can actually probably call them and say, hey, did you pay Tobias Buckell this much to do this? And they will find out that I don't ever want to misrepresent, the fees I'm getting. So it's always grounded in honesty, which is that like, hey, this is the most I've ever gotten paid to do this kind of thing, so that I'm operating from a place of truthfulness, definitely. So yeah, I mean, it would be nice for me to come out and say like, oh, I've been paid as much as $20,000 for a weekend of speaking, but no, I'd never do that.
Yeah.
Nor should you. I think it's, it may sound like a cliche, but in this instance, honesty really is the best policy.
Hey, sometimes cliches are cliches for a reason.
That is true.
Exactly. Toby, what
should I say? It's not a cliche, it's an archetype.
It's an archetype. There you go. And an archetype never goes out of style.
Yeah. Toby, one thing I really admire about you is that, unlike most authors who want to take their early works and put them in a drawer and deny they ever existed, a couple of years ago you you self-published your own short story collection that is specifically designed to show new authors the way a published author's career, or rather writing style, can evolve. And you published short stories that didn't work and talked about why. And I want to ask, like, what gave you that idea, and tell me a little bit about like how you chose which story. I'm not even sure if you put every story that wasn't sold in there or not.
Sure, it was a 2-hit combo. One is that, in this age of self-publishing, you suddenly have a whole lot of new options in front of you. And a number of people kept telling me that I should take, to back up a bit, I wrote a lot of short stories before I became published. I wrote 150 short stories, 50 of which went on to become published.
Wow.
So I have 100 sort of dead short stories on my hard drive that never became published, and for good reason,
Right.
and I kind of view I use self-publishing in many different venues as well as what people call traditional publishing now. But a number of people kept telling me, oh, you should put those 100 stories up for people to read and sell them. And I kept responding, no, they're nascent, they're horrible, they're just getting started, they're not published for a reason. They're I've got 300 or 400 rejections in my files for those stories, and for good reason. They're a part of my growing up as a writer. But the idea of taking some of them and showing my fans, my readers, some of the early ideas I was having was appealing, but I really wanted to kind of frame it in such a way that people weren't like, oh man, this is some crap that he posted online to get us to pay for it. And I started kind of trying to think of like, how do I justify this? And at the same time, I was talking, it's sometimes when your chocolate and your peanut butter come together and you just suddenly go, oh, wait, I've got an idea. So the chocolate is that idea of like, oh, how do I get people to buy some of these early stories without hating me? And then the peanut butter was that I was talking to some writers about how writing books always show the best examples of how things are done. And they talk about what not to do, but they very rarely show these concrete examples of what not to do. And I've written a bit about writing. I've done some workshop, teaching, but I've never done a thing where I've put together bad examples and showed why they're bad and why they don't work and why they're awkward to read. And a lot of writers who are beginning can benefit from that. And so I had this moment of clarity as I was thinking about those two problems separately, where I kind of put them together and I went, oh, you know what? I have a lot of bad fiction.
Don't we all?
So I could actually kind of combine these two things and take all these early stories and write about why each one sucks and put them together and do an anthology and explain what it was I was learning from each project as I was going along in my career. So I didn't take all 100 stories. I've saved everyone from that particular form of torture. But I took, I think, 14 or 15 stories out of the 100 and ranging from the very beginning of my career all the way through to the end, and included even one short story that was rewritten 4 times over a, I think, 6 or 7 year period, showing how it went from just a very not sellable, problematic piece to a published piece and its journey. And I just take each of those sort of samples of my career as I was progressing and show the mistakes I was making, and many times just repeatedly making the same mistake over and over and over again with the stories until I kind of beat that out of myself. And I put it all together and I kind of contextualize everything and put it out there as a writing manual. And people who encounter it really dig it. I've gotten some really nice letters about it, even though it kind of feels weird to have your most horrible examples of writing out there.
Yeah.
No, that is a brave thing to do, and I think there are a number of authors, even bigger, actually especially bigger authors, who would never want to go there ever in their career. That is a vulnerable, exposing thing to do, and I give you total props for it. Also for the chocolate and peanut butter metaphor, because now I really want a Reese's cup. Really.
Yeah, I will not go raid my daughter's Easter basket. I will not.
God, there's Easter candy everywhere, man. You can't escape it. It's just that time of year. And
I know, right now it's on sale, too.
Yeah, that's the thing.
It's the day after Easter that you get the good chocolate.
Yeah, which I can't have. I can't have it.
Oh. But yeah, it was an interesting project, and I enjoyed kind of looking back at the stories, and it's one of the things I tell writers is one of the easiest ways to tell if you're growing as a writer is if you can look back on something you wrote a year or 2 years ago and spot how you suck and and how much further you've come. If you look at something you wrote 2 years ago and you're like, yeah, that's it, I'm still a friggin' genius. By definition, you're not growing, right?
Right.
So you need to be able to look back on something you wrote and spot how you would have done things differently and how you've come along further as a writer. And so for me, it was really encouraging to go back and see it. It's like, oh, I can see glimmers of hope in this piece, but look at all the things I was doing wrong. And yeah, that's great. That shows you how far you've come. And doing this kind of 15-year retrospective meant I could kind of identify all these little different larval stages of myself as a writer, and kind of spot a few lessons out of all these different stories, and kind of write and explain exactly what it is that's going wrong in the stories in such a way that anyone who reads that introduction can then read the story and say, oh, okay, yeah, I get what he's saying. He completely fails to do X, Y, Z in this story, and that's why this sucks.
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
and,
Matt. Matt was praising you for being brave enough to put out the stories, but what strikes me is I don't know if I've ever been good enough to be able to spot specifically what's wrong with older stuff. I can spot that I've grown, and I know that stuff reads better and is stronger, but like the specifics of a story that goes wrong enough to like write an intro to it like you did, that's just I can't even imagine being able to do that, and that's what really impresses me.
I think most people don't try either.
That's true. That's fair.
I think Toby, you probably learned a lot in just making the attempt at analyzing the old stuff.
Oh, it was not just a learning experience for anyone who gets the book. It was a learning experience for me, because you can kind of spot what your most common mistakes are, and probably still are. Right. You kind of look back at that and you go like, oh yeah, I still struggle with that. That's interesting.
No, I think it's less about the ability to do that and more about making the attempt and actually, doing. I don't think a lot of authors do that. Like really take the time to go through it and dissect it and write a piece about it. So no, that's a great learning experience. And I think you should always be aiming to grow. I think there are tons of bestsellers who can actually learn from that, because I think there are plenty of people who find something that works and just go, you know what? I'm good. This will just be me for the next 30 years. I don't need to learn anything else or try anything else.
The maxim that I tell new writers, you should be able to look back on something you wrote a year or two ago and see things that you would do differently, or see that you've grown, came about because I used to have this real strident opinion that if you got 500 rejections, you'd sell something.
Right.
Ray Bradbury had this apocryphal tale of how he got 500 rejections before he sold his first short story. And so when I was in college, that was my goal, was to get 500 rejections. And so just because it's like something concrete, like I have this real belief in the difference between concrete goals and milestones. In other words, you can say like, I'd like to win a Hugo Award, but like you can't force that to happen or we'd all have Hugo Awards.
Yeah.
Right.
So you have to find these like things that you actually can control and do that puts you down that path. So like finishing a story and submitting it is something concrete that is within my power. Right. I don't know if it's a good story, but I can do a story and I can get a rejection. Like that I can do.
If there's one thing writers can do, it's collect rejections.
Yeah.
I absolutely am sure I can collect some rejections here. So it just forced me to kind of work backwards. I want 500 rejections. That means I need to write this many short stories within this many years and submit them this many times. And you just kind of work backwards from there. And I wanted to get 500 because that's, like if Ray Bradbury had 500 rejections, I'm obviously not friggin' Ray Bradbury. So it's probably going to take me 500 rejections or more to achieve a career. So that's just kind of where I headed. And
no, man, yeah, that makes as much sense as any metric, really, that you can.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is on one hand, it's completely arbitrary. On the other hand, it just gave me something to work towards every day. And I mean, obviously, I focus on being a better writer and infusing myself with art. But on the concrete, practical terms, it was just like, have I gotten a rejection this week? No. Oh crap, I'm falling behind.
We're all about the concrete. We're all about the concrete on this show.
Finishing and submitting those, so you're actually, you're forcing yourself, and you become better through the repetition of that. So it's really just about a motivator,
just building formulas for success around your daily habits. And so I'd written up something like that where I just said that it's hard for me to conceive of someone, getting 500 rejections without a sale. And someone wrote to me and was like, I have 500 rejections and I've never sold a bleeping thing.
Oh, you can swear on this show.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
I was really challenged by that. Whenever a fact lands in front of your feet that completely contradicts your worldview, it takes a little while to digest. So I kind of circled around and was like, okay, this is really fascinating to me, sir, by email. Can you tell me anything more about yourself? And so we chatted back and forth by email, and I managed to get a story from him from the beginning of his career and at the end of his career as, I don't know if it's career, but I got an early story and the latest story from him, and there'd been no growth.
Wow.
Right? He was just spitting stories out, he's just spitting a story out every 2 weeks, submitting it, but like there was no attention being paid to growth or learning new craft or anything like that. He was just a factory.
Yeah.
And that kind of like had me go like, oh, okay. And I immediately ran back and took a look at some of my work that was a year old, because I was like, can I spot a change? Can I spot a difference? Has there been growth? And when I found that I could indeed look back on something I'd written a year ago and feel that it was, a piece of crap compared to what I was currently working on, I kind of was like, oh, good. There's an upward trend.
And it supported the doctrine that you had created for yourself. You were able to reaffirm it.
So I was like, so now I need to amend it. If you get 500 rejections and you can't look back on something you wrote 2 years ago and see that you're, getting better, then I'll be shocked that you haven't sold anything.
Well, all good doctrines need to evolve like that. No, I have a friend who had a boss he had a saying that I appreciated very much, which is some people have 20 years experience and some people have 1 year's experience 20 times. And I think
wow.
That's the key difference in what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Toby.
Oh, no, that's exactly it. I totally agree.
I gotta say this is comforting to me, this talk, because I left an agent because she really wanted me to sell something I'd written back in 2006, and she didn't like the stuff I was working on at the time I was with her. And finally I just said, are you more interested in this thing I wrote 8 years ago? And what do you think of my writing now? And she finally says, I think I could sell the thing from 8 years ago, and I don't like the writing now. And I'm like, this is what I'm growing into. This is who I'm becoming, and we can't move forward. So I left her, and I've always I think I've known it was the right decision, but every once in a while I worry, and just hearing the whole view you have of growth and everything, that helps me.
Yeah, there's such a thing as bad growth too, and that you're talking about bad growth right there. Yeah.
Well, sort of. I'm more talking how I was happy with how I was growing, but she wasn't.
Well, I'm saying,
she wasn't going with me.
If you had conformed to her idea, I mean, you were heading towards a place of bad growth, and you chose not to do that. Is what I'm saying. Yeah.
I see. Yeah.
Well, and there's also just the simple fact that like we're just not paid enough to be deeply unhappy with what we're doing.
Yeah.
Not at all.
No kidding.
It is one of those. I have this quadrant that I make when I teach workshops, which is there's it's basically like a teacher's rubric, and it's on one side you've got sort of enjoyment, and along the bottom you've got like monetary success, and you just divide that up into 4. And so you look at that and you go like, okay, and if I do something I hate and it's monetarily successful, if you look at the quadrant, then I'm 50-50 happy, right? I'm only 50% happy because I'm succeeding at it, which makes me happy, but it's something I hate, which makes me unhappy. So the best case scenario of doing something you hate is that even if it succeeds wildly, you're still like half unhappy about it. And if you do something you hate and it fails, you're going to be 100% unhappy. Right? So your worst case scenario is 100% happy to, somewhere around 50% happy if it's wildly successful. Whereas if you do something that you're happy about, the failure state is, well, you still were happy about doing it, but it failed. So you've got 50% happy as your fail state, right? So right off the bat, your fail state is roughly co-equal to your success state above, right? And if you do something you really love and it's successful, you get that 100% happiness. It's a crude graph, but it's kind of how I kind of approach everything I do in this business. Because if I wanted to be rich and successful, I would be working in finance and not art.
That is an inescapable truth that I think not enough writers come to, which is because that's the thing, man. There are plenty of writers who get into this going, no, this is how I'm going to do it. This is how I will amass wealth and fame beyond my wildest dreams. And
I think there's such easier ways to amass wealth.
I know, right? For real. Yeah, way less work and way less stress, and my hair wouldn't be gray. But yeah, so no, the thing is, you're not given a compass, so all these metrics you're talking about, you do have to kind of create them for yourself. And I think the ones you have absolutely work, man. So I give you a lot of props.
I want to talk about all the things to Toby, but we need to get to questions in a minute. But I do want to mention his book that's coming out next year because, okay, just tell us about it, Toby, because I can't remember if you're adding to your project with Paolo from years ago, or what are you doing with that?
Tangled Land is the title. It'll be coming out from Saga Press in early 2018. Paolo and I, a number of years back, wrote these 2 connected novellas side by side, called The Executionist was my novella, and The Alchemist was Paolo's novella. These are set in sort of a magic land where the byproduct of magic is this stuff called bramble, which if you touch it puts you to sleep, pretty much in a coma. And it's, as empires have overused magic, it has spread and brought them down and just completely choked them. And so those did really well for us. We had a lot of fun with them. We came out through Audible. We did limited edition copies through Subterranean Press that were gorgeous. And then he and I did the ebooks ourselves. And we ended up selling the rights to Saga Press for a bundle that includes those 2 novellas plus 2 new novellas that we've written. And then we spent a lot of time working on making this all connect together and sort of work together as what will be a book in 2018 that everyone could read. That's pretty friggin' awesome as far as I'm concerned. It was a lot of fun to write. And it was a total passion project. We had no idea that Saga Press would kind of jump on it and that there'd be all this excitement around what we'd written. We just kind of got together over a retreat once, and we're like, hey, that was a lot of fun to write the first 2. Let's write 2 more and see where this takes us.
Yeah, and I just have to say, and I'm telling this for the readers not to fangirl at Toby, but The Executionist is one of my favorite things I read that year. It was awesome.
Oh, thank you.
So really, really encourage everyone to go find it now and then buy the Saga book next year.
That's very cool. And I'm all about the novellas and the burgeoning novella mainstream market, so that's another really cool thing that will be out there in it.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see the novella market bloom. I love the length.
Oh, me too. Yeah, just creatively, fiscally, like it just makes sense so many ways. It's really cool. So that is a very cool thing that I will personally be picking up. That'll be very cool.
Cool.
So Matt, do you want to go to Twitter? Because I know we had a lot of questions.
We have many Toby-specific questions that will require context for those new to you, but that just speaks to the power of your audience, sir. Paul Weimer asks, what keeps you coming back to look at aspects and parts of Pepper's story and life?
You want to give us a little context before you answer that?
Sure. I look at the Mexica, the Aztecs in my first handful of novels based in the Xenowelf universe. So Crystal Rain, Ragamuffin, Sly Mongoose, The Apocalypse Ocean. They're more featured heavily in the first 3. So that comes from a childhood just fascination with the fact that, I don't know, 2nd, 3rd grade, when you first learn that they kind of sacrificed human beings.
Like you do,
Like you do. And when I was a kid, the teacher just kind of just presents that and moves on. And I just remember as a child just kind of being like, hold on.
Anybody else hear
really
that?
Want to dwell on this.
The part about the human sacrifice, was that just me? Okay,
yeah.
Just a second.
Exactly, and so from a young age, I just became really fascinated with that piece of history and area, and so it bled into those books a little bit. In that I had that featured, and in college I read some really interesting primary scholarship about them and what their theology was and why they considered human sacrifice so important. Which is this great exchange with, I think, I'm blanking on his name, but there was a priest, the a Jesuit priest who went and traveled and did a lot of interviews right after the fall of the Aztec Empire. And he has this great back and forth with this gentleman where he says, like, how can you do this? How can you sacrifice human beings? And the guy returns to him and says, hey, look, what's the most important thing in life? Human life. So what's the most amazing sacrifice that you can give to your God? A human life. There was this like odd kind of internalization of respect for human life that kind of got tangled somewhere and came back out this other side that they had. And I really wanted to put that into a human being, which was Oashktal in Crystal Rain. So I don't agree with it, by the way, just FYI. It wasn't like I came around to the position after reading some of this stuff. It just was amazing to me how understandable it was, the logic that got them there. Right. And I was also just fascinated by how horrified other tribes and civilizations and groups that lived around the Mexica found this whole thing pretty horrific themselves. It's like one of the reasons Cortez had so much help with the march up towards Mexico City was that a lot of people really hated the Aztecs in the area. And so it was really interesting to do a lot of reading where the point of view from the people on the ground was that Cortez was a useful instrument at the time. Whereas when I first encountered the story, Cortez was kind of like this conquering hero who had guns, and guns just kind of rolled all the Aztecs over, and they just occupied and took all the gold, which kind of centers Cortez as this sort of like, right, tremendous, powerful individual. And yeah, guns did have this like, destabilizing effect, but the truth was that like there were just these thousands and thousands and thousands of warriors from other tribes that basically hooked up with Cortez and were like, oh, you're marching on the Aztecs? Can we join you? That's a good idea, because a lot of them had just this like really long history of bad blood, because the Mexica had these things called the Flower Wars, where they were constantly feuding and fighting and capturing people to be sacrificed, and people who did not share those values did not like that. So the deeper I dug into it, and I'm giving a horrible generalization there, so please forgive me, those of you who know the history a lot better than this. That's just kind of the summary of how I got sucked into reading a lot of it and bringing in some of those elements into the books. It is was just one of those things that just stuck with me since childhood, at wanting to put that into a piece of fiction, but then also to humanize Oashktal, and in particular to humanize their descendants in Sly Mongoose, where they've turned their backs on human sacrifice and are kind of embarrassed about the whole thing, and dealing with the after effects of that while still holding very strongly to their faith tradition, which was something that kind of caught some readers off guard, that they were still strongly kind of progressing through the novels. And I just thought that was a very human development to put in there, particularly since I felt bad for them, since the whole reason that human sacrifice and things like that were brought back were because aliens kind of used them as their useful pawns. So it's just, that's all the stuff that's in the Zenowell. Sorry, I got sidetracked there, but I just found all that fascinating when I was doing the historical research, and I kind of brought that forward into the books. I forget what the other question was.
No, it's fine. I was fascinated by your explanation of that. No, Paul was asking why you come back to look at aspects and parts of Pepper's story and life in particular.
I find Pepper really easy to write. He is this sort of trench coat badass, cliche archetype, whatever you want to call it.
Some of the best
TV tropes are, poke fun at me for that, actually. But I'm listed. Crystal Rain is listed under the trench coat badass and tropes, which makes me happy to no end. But it is a character that for some reason I find easy to write. I don't know if it's because I'm a child of the 80s and the anti-hero, like when the comic books I was starting to read, like, when Spawn came in and just kind of broke the brightly colored comic book hero thing. And we were all just like, holy crap, he's like evil, but like he does good somehow. Just really kind of stuck in the back of my head. And Pepper is sort of that character. I have like incredible like moral qualms about the nature of the anti-hero, but like I find them so fun to write. And to a certain extent, like if I'm not having fun writing, it gets very miserable. So I do like playing with him. I do like the chaos he causes. It makes it very fun for me to plot and structure around him and to create things that go awry. And I just keep coming back to him because I find it, every time I sit down to write a Pepper story, it's just sort of like, how many buckets of blood can I throw at the screen here? There's just a little 13-year-old in me that just kind of starts giggling whenever I get to write a Pepper story. And so I just come back to it because it's fan service for readers, but it's really also fan service for me because I just like unleashing this character onto the page. It provides me with a great deal of fun.
We're back to the quadrant about whether it makes you happy or not.
Sorry?
We're back to the quadrant about what makes you happy.
Yes. No, I literally, it's one of these things where sometimes there's this little voice in the back of me that's like, you should strive for literary greatness and, think about, how people might receive this story come award season. And there's another part of me that just goes like, dude, chill. Just have some fun.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got Mary Haskell, both says and asks, Toby's Joe Blow Neo Pro series was vital to me when I was a burgeoning Neo Pro. Does Toby have any Joe Blow style thoughts for, say, the first 5 novel stage? And can you guys tell me the term or just coin one for that no longer debut, not yet established phase of the career? So
that was I wrote. Yeah, that's a we could do an entire like running series about that. The advice. I don't know what we call someone who's in the. I always use the phrase mid-career novelist.
Right.
I'm smack in the middle of that, Mer. So I at this point in my career, I feel awkward about sort of giving advice formally because at this, like with novels, it's so much more complex than when I was kind of talking about short stories and trying to get a voice and help your career out, because it's one of those cases of the more I've learned, the more I realize I don't know.
Yeah.
And I feel really, I don't want to break things is basically how I feel, right? I feel like I'm kind of through a china shop and people are kind of like, give us advice. And that's equivalent to like running through it really quickly. I don't want to give, because advice is so specific to each writer that like what will work for one writer doesn't necessarily work for another. Like write more books faster might work for one writer, and like slow down and take your sweet time might work for another. But like telling some other writer who just needs to finish a damn book is take your sweet time is not going to work for that person. It's so complex that I'm kind of honestly overwhelmed by that side of things and kind of just trying to stay in my own lane and not screw anyone up.
I hear you. No, I totally hear you. Mary, basically the answer is like the rest of us, you're just going to have to figure it out. I'm sorry. We do the best we can here. I can't solve all the problems for you. No, but so there was
to jump on that grenade.
Yeah. As for the coining a phrase for no longer debut, not yet established phase, I don't know about that one. My first thought was like
shiny.
No longer shiny and new. Right.
Tarnished.
No, I don't know.
Dull and tarnished. I don't know.
You're kind of at the pre-revenue stage of a tech startup, at that point. But then you can be pre-revenue for a long time in this business, so maybe that's not accurate either.
Yeah. Pre-revenue just is depressing. I'd rather have tarnished.
Tarnished. We'll go with tarnished. I like tarnished. We all agree on tarnished? I think that works.
Works for me.
Brandon O'Brien asks, what do you think has changed both your process and your comfort level from your first year writing SFF to now? What have you learned?
From the first year of writing SFF to now, what have I learned?
Every single thing, Toby. Go.
All of it.
I had a lot of humility beaten into me. So like we talked about the power of no, that was one of the most useful lessons for me because I was hungry. I was hungry to be where I am now, so hungry. And I made a lot of mistakes along the way that had to do with not taking the time to sort of focus more on the art, but try to become this thing I wanted to be. So most of my mistakes center around rushing. And I think that's the most important lesson from the first year of writing to now that I've learned, which is making sure the work was everything I needed it to be, rather than focusing on the, can I get this out? And can I get this sale? Can I get this thing? Can I pump up my ego? Can I get where I want to be? Can I get this career off the ground? Most of my mistakes have to do with like just wanting that brass ring so hard that I was, not that I like horribly damaged the art, but that my attention wasn't where it should have been. Like I could have leveled up faster. In other words, had I been focused on that side of things, you know, I got where I you know, I'm happy to have gotten where I am, but there were times when I look back and go like, you know, like that didn't have to be such a miserable experience if I just focused on the art from the get-go and then focused on the business once everything was where I wanted it to be. That's where I made most of my mistakes. So.
Well, that either completely deflates or segues perfectly into our next question. We'll find out. It comes from James L. Sutter, who asks, what's one mistake or choice you made in your writing career that really set you back? A lesson you learned the hard way. And he hashtagged it Ditch Diggers, which I just want to say I really appreciate because it makes me much easier to follow these questions. So thank you, James.
Yeah, so that would circle back to my hurrying. You know, I'm ADD. I'm always kind of scatterbrained, and it's hard for me to sort of bear down and look at big projects and chunk them up into the little bits and focus on the day-to-day. So it was always easier for me to kind of focus on little things that felt like being a writer as opposed to like the big things on a day-to-day basis, you know.
Chasing that feeling of being a writer.
Yeah. Yes. Here's the shiny. And as I ease into things and have gotten further along in my career, I'm a little bit more interested in like the work itself. Not in terms of like, oh, I'm trying to like become more award worthy or great or write the great American novel, but I am more interested in like, am I having fun on a daily basis? Am I growing on a daily basis? Am I reading stuff that I normally wouldn't read on a daily basis to expand my palette? Am I researching? Am I staying fresh? Am I avoiding burnout? You know, like that kind of stuff where I'm focused on my relationship with the work and the art that I do every day, and less on the, you know, have I made myself feel important today? Or have I been on the phone to try and make a deal today? I'm much more comfortable with these sort of like long silences where I just sort of bear down and focus on work and trying to get things done that are solely for the purpose of the thing being fun itself. So like we were just talking about the project I did with Paolo, like I knew we would probably sell it somewhere when I was working on it, but to be honest, most of it was that I just wanted to come back to this universe and play around with it with my buddy, because Paolo and I wrote the first novellas, you know, a long time ago when we were just basically both, you know, very newish writers, and it was before Paolo won all of his awards. And so we were just spitballing ideas back and forth on a car ride and having fun. And it was like this like energized, adrenalinized, you know, fun thing that we just did together. And then it took off and had its own little life of its own. And when we circled back to do it again, it was again like, hey, let's just sit down for a week and a half and just write and talk to each other across laptops about what we're writing and how cool it is, and just have good laughs over how demented our world building is. And that's just a tremendous amount of fun. So the fact that it ended up, you know, doing well is, you know, because Paolo has a great name and is doing really well. But part of it, I think, is just that because we were having a lot of fun and just deeply in the idea of how can we make this great and enjoy this process, I think something interesting came out of it. And I don't ever regret sitting down and doing that sort of thing. It always ends up doing well for me in the long run. And some of my best projects have been just me sitting down going like, oh, this is a cool idea. Let's just sit inside of this for the next 3-4 weeks and see if there's something here. And if there is, let's just run with it.
Right. As wrapped up as we all get in the business side of things, I think it definitely behooves us all to return to something pure like that now and then. So I feel you.
For the record, I'm not sure if you've actually said this. You're speaking of Paolo Bacigalupi, the co-author of The Alchemist and Executionist. I couldn't remember whether you actually said Bacigalupi, so if people have just been hearing Paolo, just wanted to say that.
Let me name drop my awesome friend. Yeah.
No, you're mentioning your co-author. I don't think it's name dropping when you're talking about somebody you're working with.
Yeah.
I think he should just be Paolo. I just go, by this point, just be Paolo, man. You can get away with that.
It's like Prince.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Fiction by Paolo. That's all you need.
Yeah. That would be nice.
Mur, do we have any email questions? I've exhausted my Twitter questions.
Okay. We've got a couple, but most of them actually are encouraging us to do full episodes. And by encouraging, I mean I think we should do the full episodes.
Do we not already do full episodes? What's a full episode?
No, someone wants to talk about submitting scripts and pitching ideas for TV shows. That's not a let's talk about that for 2 minutes. That's we should do an episode on that. That's what I mean.
So they have subjects they want us to do whole episodes on.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, they have questions, and I'm suggesting we do whole episodes on them so we can give them the time they need.
Absolutely. Well, then, you can hold those in reserve until we can expound upon them.
Yeah, I think we should. One more thing I wanted to mention as sort of an end piece, but I want to give Toby a chance to talk about it if he wants to, is that we all have crowdfunding. We're all on Patreon, and Toby, you just recently did a blog post on the things you learned after being on Patreon for a month. And I've been on it for like a year, and I was reading that and going, wow, that's insightful. So I actually learned a bit from what you said. So do you want to talk a little bit about your Patreon?
Thank you.
And your lessons.
I jumped into the I jumped into the Patreon world here, and it's a little over a month now. It's been a wild ride. It was a case of 50% of my income comes from freelancing and 50% comes from writing, and the writing is highly variable, as you guys know, and you get royalties come every 6 months from traditional publishers, and you never know what they're going to be on all the other venues. So I've been extremely lucky. I'm very lucky that half my income comes from writing, and I've been able to freelance to put together the other. But I just had a very large freelance gig just fold from underneath me. Now I've been really good about setting aside money, so I've got about 9 to 12 months in the bank of freelance income set aside, because I've had a really lucky, and I live in a town that's really affordable, so I've been really lucky in that regard. And I kind of looked around and thought, it's time to try something artistically a little dangerous, which is, trying to spend more time working on the art. And so I decided to try a Patreon because I love doing short fiction. It's, I've published 60 some short stories. I've written 100 more than that, like I mentioned before I sold those. And I thought like the idea of Patreon and using a Patreon to write a short story a month would be an interesting challenge. And hopefully it would provide something for the readers. It felt a little bit scary, like I mentioned in that blog post, to be jumping out like that, because it's definitely a case where you're hanging it all out in public in terms of whether or not you meet your Patreon goals. But I just thought, like, you only live once, and everything's a risk. So I thought I'd try and see if I could use that to replace the freelance income, and see if I could provide enough value for fans that they would feel like they could back it and get a short story a month, or get a peek behind the scenes at what I'm currently working on. I just posted a snippet of a short story that I'm revising for someone, and I just posted a snippet of the very first chapter of a sort of big fantasy novel that I'm starting right now, and talked to them a little bit about the concept of what that book was going to be about. So it's a place where if you like my work, you get to see a lot more of it, and you get to see the stuff that I'm working on and in progress, and really get a kind of behind the scenes look. It's a bit scary because I'm going all in on the fiction now for a year to see where it takes me, and I don't know how this is going to end.
That's a big step, man. That's really cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
What's your URL?
It should be patreon.com/Tobias Buckell. The website is www.tobiasbuckell.com. That is TOBIAS and BUCKELL.com. Buckell. It looks like buckle and it rhymes with hell. And there I keep a blog, and you can find my work, links to it. There's some free stuff that can be downloaded, PR kit, all the good stuff. And then on Twitter, I am at Tobias Buckell, which is where I spend a lot of my time. It's sort of set up for someone who's ADD. It's just like crack cocaine for someone like me. So that tends to be where I spend most of my time if you're looking to engage with me. And of course, there's the Patreon at www.patreon.com/Tobias Buckell, where you can get a short story a month delivered to your mailbox if you are so inclined.
Very cool. We'll have to have you on at the end of the year to find out how that all went. I think that would be very informative.
All in tears.
All in tears, but we'll learn from each tier, Toby, so that's okay.
Every single one.
I'm always happy to come back from the front with information. I've done it with Kickstarter. I've done it with self-publishing. I've done it with traditional publishing, and now I'm doing it with Patreon, and there'll probably be a chart.
Ooh, charts.
Well, then we got to have you back if there's going to be a chart. I mean,
definitely.
Mur and I are chart freaks. No one's bigger. So.
For a person who is a creative, I'm oddly in love with Excel.
Man, I fear that thing, but I admire people who can use it.
I like Post-its.
He does. It's true. If you want to find us online, you can do ditchdiggers.murverse.com. I'm on Twitter at MightyMur, and Matt is on Twitter at MattFNWallace. If you have a question for the Ditch Diggers, email me, mightymur@gmail.com, and put Ditch Diggers in the subject line. And Matt, is there anything else you want to say?
We have books out, and you need to shill yours. Yes.
Yeah. I need to make a list on a Post-it note and stick it on my desk.
It
all
works.
The things to talk about. 6 Wakes is still out. Audio, ebook, and print. People seem to like it. It's a clone murder mystery in space. It has people guessing, and apparently sitting on the toilet for too long. Someone complained about that.
Oh, well, that's what...
He didn't want to get up.
End up with a clot.
Yeah, he didn't want to get up, so he was too...
You don't want deep vein thrombosis.
I know that. I was worried.
What's your legal liability on the book for
somebody dying on the toilet reading your book?
I'm not really sure. I might have to ask my editor. But anyway,
a high recommendation though. Man. Someone was willing to risk their life to finish 6 Wakes. People, come on.
Right.
That's
right.
the blurb you want for the next printing.
That's true.
It is. 6 Wakes. It'll keep you on the toilet all night.
And Matt has a whole bunch of novellas, and they're all connected.
Everything.
That was your segue. Go.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. No, I write a wonderful series of novellas called Sin du Jour. The latest one out now is Idle Ingredients. The next one is Greedy Pigs, and it's coming May 16. I also write a luchador buddy cop series called Rencor, the first of which, Life in Grudge City, is out now from Parts Unknown Publishing. So please buy all of those things. I need to eat.
And if I can jump in, if
Please
you're a Halo fan, next week, Halo Envoy launches. It is the latest Halo book by me. It features the return of Grey Team. some deep, dark secrets buried under the desert that so far no Halo fan has guessed.
Ooh.
And yeah. No one's figured out what it is I decided to make the big bad, and that's going to be a lot of fun, I think, for people who enjoyed the previous Halo book, if you're a Halo fan.
Toby, we've got to have you back on to talk about working in licensed fiction, collaboration, more Patreon stuff, so please tell me you'll come back.
Absolutely. I love doing podcasts, and you guys are a lot of fun. So.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for being on the show, Toby.
Thanks for having me.
You can support us at patreon.com/mightymur.
Ditch Diggers!
Theme song by Devo Spice, devospice.com.